Welcome everybody to my podcast, Big Little Small Talk. I'm Megan O'Hara-Sullivan and I love to talk, but I also love to listen. If you're new here, welcome. Thanks for joining me today. I hope you enjoy the episode. Hello listeners, you're on Big Little Small Talk and you're with me, Megan O'Hara-Sullivan. Today I've got someone who's a very special guest. I know that I always say that, but this time he is a very special guest. His name's Arun Pratap and he's the CEO of Pyrocal, which is a waste to carbon company. Arun, you're going to be able to explain it to me further. But I just want you to respond to this quote. Plastic can take up to 1,000 years to decompose in landfill. It is the worst invention in history. How do you feel about that?
I think, well, first of all, good evening, Megan. Thank you for the opportunity to talk. Look, that's a strong quote. I think that there are opportunities for most materials to be recycled and reused in various forms. Now, I think the technology is moving so quickly and we're using either brand new technology or, in fact, reinvigorating older technology now to deal with a great many waste management problems that we find confronting our society, and plastics is just one of them. In fact, Pyrocal, as part of its solution and value proposition for various customers, is to deal with certain types of plastics and dispose of it in a environmentally and socially responsible way.
Okay, so I want you to explain the process that you use, because it's not incineration, it's not burning things, is it? So tell me sort of how it works.
Okay, so Pyrocal best describes itself as a waste to carbon company. Really, the genesis of it was in using biomass or agricultural waste residues and using a gasification plant to use high heat but low levels of oxygen and small amounts of time. So it's the combination of those three things that allow us to carbonise material rather than incinerate it. And when I say carbonise, we're not burning the carbon fraction of that material. So we're interrupting the combustion process, if you like. So what that does is it doesn't create any ash or slag or residues of that nature, and most importantly, doesn't release the carbon dioxide into the atmosphere. So this is what we're all talking about globally at the moment, and it's featuring very prominently in federal lead up to the federal government elections, as we're all aware. So our process, like I said, high levels of temperature, so around about 650 degrees, low levels of oxygen and a small amount of time. So I'm talking about 100 seconds of resonance time of this material in our reactor before we burn off the volatiles of that process. So we're not burning, we're carbonising.
Okay, so you started to say before what sort of materials go in there, and it's got a special name. I just can't remember what it is. What's it called? The product that you put in?
Feedstock generally.
Feedstock.
Yep.
So, which I was a bit confused. I was thinking that might have been grain for cattle or something, but it's not just that, because it can be lots of things. It can be municipal waste. It can be peanut shells. It can be hospital waste. All that sort of thing. Yeah. So. The process, it goes into this machine, I gather, and then what comes out the other end?
So what comes out the other end is dependent upon what you put in. So you're quite right. The generic term of feedstock can describe a great many inputs into the material. So as I said, we started off in using biomass, so organic material. You've mentioned shells, nut shells, but can be cotton gin trash, sugarcane mulch, timber waste, and biosolids, which is the human waste. And just recently, just last week actually, was the formal launch of our biosolids project with a neighbouring council in southeast Queensland. So what comes out of that depended on what goes in. So in the case of biomass, we produced a biochar, which is this carbonised material, which if you put under a microscope is full of pores, which means it can retain water, and is a fantastic environment for receiving fertilisers and a habitat that promotes growth. So we would call that a soil ameliorant or soil conditioner. So it can be added as like a fertiliser to the soil. So we're taking biomass material, carbonising it, and returning it back into the soil to promote the health of that soil. So it's a circular economy, a full 360-degree circular economy outcome for waste going in, being treated, and then going back to where it came in a positive and a value-added sense. So the non-biomass material, feedstock, and you mentioned municipal solid waste, so that's everything in our red bin, if you like. So if you go through what we put in our kitchen bins, and you take out all of the recyclable materials, whether it be hard plastics, glass, so on and so forth, and then shred that material, which is full of plastics. I go back to our opening comment about plastics, paper, cardboard, all sorts of things, food waste, etc. As long as we can dry that material to within our feedstock specification, we're able to carbonise that material and not necessarily make a biochar that can go back into the soil for soil health, but we can reduce its volume by up to 95%. And I'll go back to hospital waste in a moment, but generally speaking, up to 95% volume reduction, and at the same time lock in the carbon that would otherwise be expelled into the atmosphere through its normal degradation over many, many years. So you're saving an enormous amount of material that would otherwise go into landfill in its full volume. So by that, that reduced amount, you're extending the life of your landfill, you're saving the residents and ratepayers money in terms of rehabilitation costs and, for that landfill, as well as the costs associated with trucking movements. You're saving on weight, the number of trucks, a whole range of cost savings come into play when you deal with even the non-biomass material.
So we've got sort of two processes. One where we produce the biochar,
Mm-hmm.
which can be, I presume, sold. You sell that to
absolutely.
You sell that to farmers or
back in the agricultural sector, nurseries, landscapers, anybody who's involved in agricultural or the horticultural sectors.
Mm-hmm. And so if you can't get the biochar, then it's all about reduction for landfill.
Correct.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And there's other things too, though, isn't there? There's the creation of energy.
Exactly.
So tell me about that.
So the process itself creates heat energy or thermal energy. So we capture that energy in a number of ways, but primarily steam and hot water. So there's a great many businesses that have waste products as a consequence of their operation that can be used as feedstock, so as material to go into the carbonisation plant, either significantly reduce the volume of that material if it has to still go onto landfill, or create a char or a biochar that can be sold into the agriculture sector, create heat that can be turned into steam or hot water and be used back into those the business processes. What is emerging as a technology at the moment is to use that same thermal energy to drive generators to create electricity. So another clean energy generator, if you like.
So are you capturing enough electricity, I gather, to be able to then feed that into the grid?
So at the moment, the levels of electricity or creating those electrons is primarily being for at a very local level. So back into the business that's creating the feedstock or the waste material in the first place. There are some emerging technologies here in Australia, which we're happy to say that we are in constant contact with, that are looking to produce much higher efficiency generators, electricity generators or engines that can be powered off the flue gas from our system. But certainly that's where the technology is going, wanting to look for greater opportunities to have more efficient generation of electricity from heat or steam.
Okay. And can you store that electricity? Is that something that, with battery technology?
Again, an emerging technology for those businesses. So we don't regard that as our core business, but we're supplying the heat, if you like, for others to then bolt onto it, to our systems. But these guys are talking about, Tesla's been very much in the news over many years now, creating battery storage that would be able to be tapped into at will, if you like.
Yeah. Okay. So, and then another thing that I gather from reading as much as I could, because it's a bit tricky to get your head around, is carbon trading. Mm-hmm. So tell me about that. How does that work?
So that's the fourth of our value propositions for our business. So Pyrocal is one of two companies at the moment that are a registered supplier of CORCs, C-O-R-C, little s, carbon dioxide removal certificates, or carbon credits for short. So in the last 8 to 10 months, we've gone through a very extensive audit process to be a registered supplier, so that we can provide carbon credits to a platform that then goes and identifies buyers for those credits. Those buyers tend to be large companies that have made representations that they're going to reduce their carbon dioxide emissions over several years. And coming out of Glasgow conference most recently, a lot of the UK or European companies are saying, anywhere from 2025 up to 2030, they'd like to be carbon neutral. Now, Australia has got its own timeframes, and again, it's another very hot topic, I think, as part of the election campaigns at the moment. But the UK and Europe seem to have an accelerated motivation for doing so. So whatever carbon or biochar that's made from our biomass, so not the non-biomass, but the biochar outcomes, qualifies for a number of certificates. So for every tonne of biochar that you make, you're assigned a number of certificates. And those certificates have a value, and those certificates are then traded through this platform by those companies looking to offset their carbon dioxide emissions. So we've been fortunate enough to go through a very extensive audit process, receive our accreditation, and so we are now the products that we make from our biomass material, generating CORCs or certificates, and they are being sold. And it is a very strong growth area. Like I said, largely being driven by the representations and promises that have been made by big companies, particularly, and that's both in the private and public sector.
So Arun, are those companies mostly doing that because their shareholders are demanding it, or is that legislation that they have to comply with to get to zero by 2050?
It's both.
Both.
So there are very strong legislative drivers in Europe, but there is also a very, very strong social and environmental conscience, if I can put it that way, that are expecting companies to be able to promote to those that buy their products or services to say it has been produced in an environmentally and socially responsible manner. And they've responded to that generally way ahead of what's happening in the legislative environment. And I foreshadow that this is what's going to happen here in Australia as well. And we're seeing a number of companies take the lead on, we're going to be carbon neutral well in advance of what the government policy seems to be of the day.
Interesting, especially on a day I read today that Tasmania is not only carbon neutral, but it's carbon negative, but not because of credits, but mostly because of the logging industry. So yeah, very pertinent today. I'll just remind the listeners that they're on 102.7 FM, and on our Big Little Small Talk today we're talking to Arun Pratap, who is the CEO of a local company, Pyrocal, which is a waste to carbon Business? Yeah. Can you tell me about the history of the business? Because it's this unbelievably great story, a local story. Tell me about it.
It is a fantastic story. So, Pyrocal had its genesis way back in the late 2000s. And the technology that was around at that time compared to what it is now is like chalk and cheese. So it was in a research and development phase for many, many years before being picked up by local businesses here, and obviously saw that there was tremendous promise and opportunity in what this technology could offer if it was given, all of the infrastructure and the backing and support that's necessary to get a new business off the ground. And so we've got some significant investors, local investors in our company, and it became or moved into its first commercial venture only a couple of years ago, and I've already mentioned that earlier on, which is the biosolids gasification project down at Logan City Council, which is turning human waste, which would otherwise be transported in trucks from the southeast Queensland area, and actually travel right through the Toowoomba region and deposit on the western side of the Toowoomba Regional Council area. So, that council identified that trucking movements and transport were a very costly exercise, and there had to be a different way to deal with this material. So we, with our partners Downer, provided a proposal. It was accepted by that local government, and here we are, official launch just last week. So it's treating the waste effluent from a population of 500,000 people. So it's a significant undertaking, and that turned trucking movements from 7 trucks a day down to 1 a week. So here's an example of that volume reduction, if you like. Plus, it's making a biochar, which that council is able to sell, and it will qualify for carbon credits as well. It is also ahead of the curve, in my view, that I think the legislation in Queensland on the disposal of biosolids onto agricultural land is going to change. That's my prediction. I think that the legislators have seen what's been happening in years gone by and said, well, it's time to do better than what we've done in the past, and what's the policy going to look like to promote that. So there's a conference just next week, and it will be attended by a number of representatives of water utilities from all over Australia coming to have a look at this technology. So we'll see where that goes. We think it's a significant a moment, not only for a Toowoomba business, but also from a societal point of view. Here's an opportunity to do something better than what we've done in the past.
Yeah, well, you've mentioned that a couple of times. The ethical or the social sort of benefits of this company. So employees, about 25 people employed. Is that where we're at the moment?
Yeah, and we're in a recruitment drive. But like all businesses, we are finding it challenging to fill a number of vacant positions that we have, both skilled and semi-skilled positions. But so far we're able to keep pace with what's happening.
What I can't quite get my head around is you've obviously got this facility at Wellcamp, but you've got something now at Logan. You build these machines or build these, what are they?
Systems,
right. So are you looking at thinking like every sort of, we'll say maybe councils, but would you be thinking like say a chipping mill or something would be having a system specifically for them? Is that what we're doing? We're building these systems as well?
So there's a number of sectors that are really crying out for assistance with their waste material. It represents a cost to them, a cost of disposal, or it represents an environmental hazard. There's a great need. Now, you mentioned wood chipping, for example. So the forestry industry is an interesting one. So there's plenty of examples where after logging has occurred, stumps are left in the ground, and those stumps stay there and rot. But over time, the planting or replanting of those grounds is affected adversely by the stumps being there. And once the logs are removed in the first instance, there's a lot of material that's left over. Most of that material is swept up, if you like, into piles, and we've all seen it driving past forestry plantations, and is ignited. It's burnt. So that is just putting carbon dioxide directly into the atmosphere. So that material, including the stumps in the ground, can be removed, trucked to a facility or a separate facility, chipped or shredded, dried, and put into a carbonisation plant, one of our systems, create a biochar and put back into the land from which it came, improving the soil health and getting another opportunity for another rotation of planting in that same ground within the normal life of that area. So that represents significant revenue and cost saving to that business, as well as doing the right thing, and because it prevents the CO2 being emitted into the atmosphere. So yes, the timber industry, the forestry industry is one of those sectors that where our systems are very attractive. Looking for other that biochar can also be used as a fuel for example, steelwork. So rather than using coke and coal, if you have to burn something, the CO2 being released from biochar is less than coke and coal. So if you have to incinerate something, this is a less of a harmful way of doing so, for example. So there's so many businesses and sectors that are looking to deal with their waste management in a different way.
Sustainable way. Now, we did touch on it a little bit earlier, but I want you to tell me about is it still a trial that you're doing with the hospital waste?
Yeah, so we've got we were provided a grant funding from the federal government to look at how we can dispose of hospital general waste and clinical waste. So again, the plastics coming, so lots of single-use plastics associated with hospitals at the moment, and a great exemplar of the increase in the use of those materials has been through COVID. So
PPE, all the masks. I can't imagine.
So where's all that going? You're just bundling it up. It's either being compacted, incinerated, or buried. So again, going back to what we spoke about earlier, the idea of carbonising that material, reducing its volume, but without incinerating, without burning it, sequestering the carbon in that material at a far, far reduced volume, and putting it into landfill is a far better outcome, cost-wise, environmentally, socially, you name it. So we're in the midst of building a bespoke system for that trial. So we have gone through a feasibility study previously with our partners here on the Darling Downs, so Darling Downs Health, and with USQ as an independent assessor of the science behind it all, and found to be very much a worthwhile opportunity, hence the funding for the building of the system. So we're progressing through that at the moment, so we're very keen to ensure that we deliver just exactly what the hospital sector is looking for as far as its waste management activities is concerned.
Would there be anything that is specific to medical waste that needs to be treated any differently to the other pyrolysis treatment?
So you can imagine that hospital waste it is besieged by contaminants. So we need to ensure that not only is the carbonisation system dealing with those contaminants, but the handling of that material as it comes to a facility, how it's done is almost zero touch, and done so in accordance with workplace health and safety regulations. So we're not concerned about the carbonisation process so much, but we are very focused on ensuring that the materials handling, like the raw material handling, the feedstock itself, is done in a way that's going to ensure that it's done safely and effectively. So we're more concerned about building the system or the infrastructure to make that happen rather than our system is concerned.
Yeah, right, okay. And I did read about the Gold Voyager, that's the craft malt place. That's a similar sort of thing, I guess, to the wood chip, is it? It's something that... Now, is there anything... When I go to the tip and I see these huge big piles of fridges and beds and metal, you're not dealing with metals, are you?
Unfortunately not. In the carbonisation process, metals, glass, ceramics and things of that nature, that's not used as a feedstock in our system. So, but there are other players in that market, and we applaud and support what they're doing at this stage, but it's certainly outside our scope at this point.
Yeah, okay. And I read too that the key drivers for the business is resource transformation, environmental protection, health and safety, and the circular economy, reduce, reuse, recycle, and that your ideals are aligned to the Sustainable Development Goals and targets. Can you explain that a little bit to me?
So,
what are the Sustainable Development Goals and targets? They're a worldwide...
So there are a series of principles, if you like, that those with that mindset are complying with or seek to operate under. So us as a business, or Pyrocal as a business, adopt those, and I think is exemplified by what we've just been speaking about, what we're seeking to do with our product outcomes and the values that we can provide our business. So it sets it's almost like a baseline, if you like, or our foundations, almost our values, if you like, by which Pyrocal then plans and directs its activities. So it's a worldwide thing, it's a global thing. We'd like to see other Australian interests and companies, public and private, adopt the same thing, and we are seeing that. We're seeing that grow more and more, and again, I think that's what the expectation is of generations younger than myself. Expect from businesses at this point in time. So we feel as though we're doing the right thing, which is it's a very good feeling to have each morning when you wake up and go to work. Like, you're trying to do the right thing, which is a wonderful feeling, and it's based on those foundations and those principles that you've mentioned.
Yeah. Okay. Well, look, Arun, you and I go way back. We go. I want to talk a little bit about how you've come to be in a job that you love so much, and every day you get up and you think, I'm going to a job that I'm doing the right thing.
Yeah.
So our radio's a little bit tricky and you can't see Arun, but you could Google him and have a look. You have Indian origins. Tell me about your mum and dad. What's their history?
So, as you said, my mum and dad, they were married in 1967. So Dad was Indian, and Mum's Australian from an English, mostly English and German background. So they met in the late 60s. Dad was a doctor, Mum was a nurse, and they were both doing their country service, if you like. So they met in Mount Isa. Dad was doing his residency out there, and Mum was on her way to London, and she was driving through central Queensland on her way to Darwin. She was going to depart. Anyway, they met over an operating theatre, as it is, playing footsies apparently while Dad was performing surgery. Anyway, Mum decided to stay with Dad, and they were married about a year later.
So your father was first generation Indian. Tell me about his background.
So I've tried on many occasions to map our family history on my dad's side, but it's inherently difficult. I'd been to India a couple of times for that purpose, but really came to a dead end. And one of the challenges to that was the fact that there wasn't any clear and consistent naming convention. So, my surname would be pretty easy to track, you would think, but the naming convention meant that their surnames are not always the same. So, it became quite difficult to follow a logical line, and so he relied on lots of conversations with people, and some of those things may be the recollections or the accuracy may have faded with time, etc. So I've never been able to fully trace my family tree, if you like, but I can say my grandmother on my dad's side was from Kashmir, which is a disputed territory up in northern India, and my father was Nepalese, and he had very strong, almost Chinese features, if you like. So, and he was very light in his skin colour compared to my grandmother, who was somewhat darker. So Dad came to Australia when he was 16, and he was fortunate enough to be amongst all of the children at the time to offer the most promise, if you like, in terms of education. The way it was at the time, and it comes from a very poor background, that everybody, the extended family, would pool their resources, their financial resources, and send the most promising student, if you like, to Australia, finish their education. And so Dad fulfilled all of those obligations. And so he did year 11 and 12 here, then went to Queensland University, finished his medical degree. I have a strong history or memory of growing up of, always being around that side of Dad's side of the family, because there was almost an obligation thereafter for quite some time, forever it seemed. So, just that's the way things worked at that time. So he did a fantastic job, in my mind, of looking after not only us as his immediate family, but the extended family as well. So,
did his mother and father then come out to Australia to live?
No, they never did. They never wanted to. Interestingly, certainly other members of the family did so. My uncles and aunts and things of that nature. And if they didn't come to Australia, they were either in New Zealand or went to Canada, which tend to be the go-to areas, if you like. But
so
yeah, my grandparents.
When you say that he looked after his extended family, you mean he sent money to them, or how do you mean?
Yeah, he supported them financially, but also, and in doing so, created opportunities to start businesses back in where they lived, and a lot were in Fiji as well. So, I've got wonderful memories of going to Fiji almost on an annual basis to visit extended family, etc. So it's probably not the Fiji experience that I would otherwise like, going to resorts and things of that nature, but nonetheless it was an opportunity to go on an aeroplane and go and visit, different culture, be part of something completely different to what I was used to growing up here in Queensland.
And were your grandparents still living up in Kashmir?
No, they all moved at that stage. So primarily Fiji. So everyone gravitated to Fiji before then dispersing to other parts of the globe thereafter. So. And
did your father speak with an accent? Does he still speak with an accent?
Interestingly, unfortunately, he's no longer with us. But I never thought Dad had an accent. But apparently he did, but I just couldn't hear it. So there you go. So he did have an accent, but it was, I could never hear it, which is interesting. It's right. What you're used to when you're growing up, I guess.
So your mother grew up in Australia.
Mm-hmm.
Whereabouts?
Brisbane girl.
Brisbane, right.
Mm-hmm.
And what was that like for her to marry this fellow, this Indian doctor? Does she talk about that very much, and whether that was kind of outside the normal, and how much discrimination did she face?
It was definitely outside the normal. So, interesting. My mum's honey blonde hair, fair skin, blue eyes, marrying a dark Indian fellow at the time in the late 1960s, was a very challenging time for both of them. neither side of the family would go to the wedding on the basis that, based on skin colour, for example. And in fact, my dad didn't meet my grandfather on my mum's side until my sister was born, and I think she was almost one year of age. So, there was the expectations in those times were very different and incredulous to us now. But my mum talked to me on so many occasions of what that was like, and she had this fascination for the way in which people would behave, just on people's appearance, for example, rather than what was, what they were, what their underlying personality. So it's a very strange thing to grow up with, and I became acutely aware of it myself. Just growing up and observing the way in which people would look or treat you or speak to you, etc. Thankfully, things have moved on, 1,000% in my experience anyway. But it's a very interesting story. I think they were pioneers back in those days, and of course, my mum and dad weren't the only ones of mixed race getting married, etc. But I look back on people who did that in those time frame and that time, and just think, yeah, they were people before their time. Being able to deal not only with prejudice, but raise a family, be successful, and do more than just their own family. Create community and be part of society. And my dad was very big into Rotary, for example, and was very very active in doing things more broadly, so ease suffering, provide solutions for people and families that were in need, irrespective of what race or creed you were. So.
Now, I know that you travelled around a fair bit when you were kids. Was that because of your father's work? He was, yeah. And one of the really interesting or strange things you told me one time, was it Maralinga? Was that? No, where was...
Mara.
Mara. I thought that he was the doctor out on a nuclear...
No, that's not him.
I must have misheard.
No. No, Mara in central Queensland, coal mining place. So, yeah, it's got its own history, but probably not as significant as Maralinga.
Yeah. So you weren't living in the desert somewhere with your parents? No, I must have just had that completely wrong. So where we did sort of cross paths, but we didn't know it until we met many years later, is that we were both at Nambour High School together. Yeah. I'm about 5 years older than you are, but we sort of could remember all of the same teachers and things like that. So Nambour High in those days, there was only Maroochydore High on Nambour High that you could go to, and Nambour High was full of surfing people, exactly. Blonde-haired, tanned up people, and we did surfing as a sport. But that meant for the girls that the girls sat on the beach and crocheted their bikinis, and the boys were surfing with the teachers. Were you one of those people?
Well, it's an interesting story, and in fact, I was just talking about this just recently. But so you're Mara in central Queensland. So my dad was the medical officer for the East Dampier Mitsui mines, and that's what took us out there. But he also had an interest in primary production. So not only was he set up a hospital out there and a surgical practice, but he had interests in cattle, cotton, grains, all sorts of things out there. So he was a very busy guy from that perspective. But anyway, we spent most of our primary school out there. We took a detour to London for several years. He took a job with British Airways as a medical officer there. So we got to go and live in London for a number of years and trip around. It was fabulous. But we came back and settled on the Sunshine Coast. So as you're right, I went to Nambour High as a consequence. So again, you're correct about surfing as a sport, which I think was, just completely bizarre to me, returning from a place that was just obsessed with football or soccer. And I came here and I was provided an opportunity to do surfing as a sport. So I became the only half Indian surfer at Nambour High or on the Sunshine Coast. I think I held that on for quite some years, but turned out I was okay at it, so it helped with the acceptance and the credibility side of things. But so there you go.
And it was right off the back of puberty blues and that sort of era, and I'm sure there's a lot of listeners who remember and experience much the same sort of thing. But while you were at Nambour High, you made a really good friend with a fellow called Glenn, and he has an extraordinary job. What does he do?
He does. Dr. Glenn Gardner. He's the Director of Maternal Fetal Medicine at Mater Mothers, and he's featured on many occasions recently on 60 Minutes and other ABC, 60 Minutes, and then on ABC programs on his chosen field, which is gynecology and obstetrics. But he operates on babies in vitro, and really deals with a specialist surgery on those suffering from spina bifida before they're born. So I met Glenn on my first day at school in Year 8 in geography with Mr. Panisi, and I actually wanted to keep away from him because he was a really cheeky kind of guy. But he caught my attention because he was very, very funny, I thought. And anyway, we ended up becoming very, very close friends and became best men at each other's weddings and so on and so forth. And I was only on the phone to him yesterday. And his career has just been stellar, is probably the way I would describe it. And he's been really inspirational on so many levels to me and to our wider group of friends, if you like, for many years. So we still keep in contact on a regular basis. I'm still surfing. He's not. We had the opportunity just 2 weeks ago, went and stayed at his place on the coast, and I said, we'll go for a surf. And he goes, you surf, I'll eat chips on the beach. So anyway, we both ate chips on the beach. And
who knew Nambour High could produce so much? So your father's a doctor, your best friend's a doctor, you've had one son. What's he doing?
He's studying biomedicine at the moment.
In the hope to become a doctor?
In the hope that he becomes a doctor.
Yeah. Was there any pressure on you, Arun, to do medicine?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely there was. But I think it became very clear to my father when I had to assist him on a number of occasions out in Mara. Personnel is hard to come by, particularly in those times in the late 70s, where helping Dad, whether it be reset somebody's arm or whatever the case may be, I'd be the first one to faint, etc. So I think you got the idea very quickly that medicine wasn't for me.
You weren't going to fall in love with someone across a corpse or something like that, like your own parents had done. No, across a appendectomy or something. Now, we're nearly running out of time, Arun, which is a shame, but I'd like to ask you a couple of questions that you don't have to put too much thought into. Now, if you could think of a celebrity couple that you wish would get back together, who would it be?
Everyone would say Brad and Jen, wouldn't they, in the first instance? But it's more topical at the moment would be Johnny and Amber. Johnny Depp and Amber Heard,
yes.
maybe.
We're not throwing cans of Red Bull at each other.
No, exactly. They seem like they deserve each other. Celebrity couple, I think, or not that this is possible anymore, but I would have liked to see Bob and Hazel get back together.
That's a great answer, I think. I was thinking more along the lines of Pamela Anderson and Tommy Lee, but you're much more intellectual than I am, Arun. Finally proved it. Okay, now if you had a choice, if you could either be really, really hot or really, really cold, which one would you go for?
I've been both, so I would prefer the really, really hot.
Right.
I have to say. Yep.
Yeah, you can always go for a surf to
exactly
cool yourself down a bit. All right, what if I asked you if you could travel back in time to any decade, where would you go and why?
Can I be a little controversial and just say it's not a decade,
do.
but it's a period of time. It would be a 10-year period of time. Would be from 1975 to 1985, and it'd be the period that I was from 7 years of age to 17. I recall that period as being just a wanderlust, like the most memorable, wonderful things happened to me during that period of time. Not at least becoming a half Indian so far.
Pivotal moment in your life, exactly. Can I ask you, because I know you love to read, we've talked books a few times, and I've read the most beautiful book of all time called Oh William. I'll have to buy you a copy because I gave my copy away to someone on the weekend. But what is your favourite book?
One of the books that I really wanted to read, as opposed to feeling either compelled to read, was Angels and Demons, would you like? But so I really enjoyed that because I really actively went out to get that book. But I think To Kill a Mockingbird probably is the be-all and end-all, I think, at this stage. And probably because it, the premise of the book and dealing with, human behaviour, in the late 30s, for example, in the midst of changing societal values and the way in which we treated each other. It kind of resonated with me in my own family experience to a small degree, as we mentioned earlier on.
And perhaps your sense of social justice too.
Could be.
Could be, yeah, definitely. All right, what about your favourite royal? Would you be into the royal family at all?
I'm not.
You're not.
But I have been watching a parody of the royal family, the Windsors. Have you seen this series? Oh, you must. You must watch the Windsors, and on that basis, I'll say that Eugenie and Beatrice are my favourite, but only because of the characters that are portrayed in that series.
Okay, well, they're notoriously bad dresses, so they say. That they always have the wackiest hats, and I've never had anyone say those two before, so that's great. I love that.
Yeah, but your listeners must, if they haven't seen it, they must watch that series.
I don't like anything that would make fun of the royal family, everyone. I just wouldn't have it. And your very last question before I let you go, because I know you are a dancing man. If I put this song on, what's the song that can't keep you off the dance floor?
Oh, it's got to be Patrick Hernandez, Born to Be Alive.
I remember the film clip with the cane.
That's
Born. Yeah, that's a song of our era, I think, and that's a perfect way to end this interview and say thank you so much, Arun, for being my guest today on Big Little Small Talk. It's been lovely to hear your journey from a young boy and to doing a job that you feel ethically proud of, and it shows.
Thank you, and thanks for the invitation.
Thank you. That's it for this week. Thanks for joining me on Big Little Small Talk. I hope you can make the time to join me next week. If you've enjoyed this episode, please subscribe on your favourite podcast app.